A very good evening to one and all present here. Drawing a definite line to determine what is more important between our privacy and our national security is very debatable, and that is the reason we have conducted this discussion. I, Janvi Sharma, moderator of today's panel discussion organized by Vedic Movement on the topic Privacy versus National Security. So, before we begin with today's discussion, I would humbly request you all the participants to use the chat box to put up any question that will be addressed by our panelists at the time of question answer round. Now, I would like to introduce our panelists for today's discussion who have taken out their precious time for all of us. Starting with our first panelist, Mr. N.A. Vijaya Shankar, famously known as Navi Sir. He is a data protection and data governance consultant, also working as an executive chairman at Foundation of Data Protection Professionals, and has also been a visiting faculty in number of premier law schools in India. He has over 40 years of domain expertise, including banking, advertising, cyber law, education, information and data security compliance, and specialized in regulatory compliance in the areas of Information Technology Act, Personal Data Protection Act of India, etc. Now let's come to our second panelist, Advocate Rajas Pengal. He is an international cyber law expert and a prominent cybercrime lawyer and has an experience of more than 10 years. He extensively works in privacy laws of USA, India, Europe, and Singapore. He also works in cryptocurrencies. He has trained more than 60,000 police officers, government officials, judges, and prosecutors across India. Our third panelist is Advocate Salman Varis. He is a lawyer with extensive experience advising clients on legal issues concerning IP, TMT, privacy, outsourcing, cybersecurity, etc. He has advised the Department of Electronics and Information Technology, Ministry of Communication and Information Technology, and Director General of Information Systems, Ministry of Defense. He is on cybersecurity. Our fourth panelist is Advocate Paneet Bhase. She is awarded as the best cyber lawyer in India, along with she is an advisor to the Rajya Sabha committees on internet laws, achieved number of awards, but the most recent is the best cyber lawyer in India. She is a mentor to over 4,000 aspiring professionals and law students and serving over 400 plus clients all over the globe. Now, I would like to begin with our panel discussion. So, our first issue is citizens' privacy in contrast to need of protecting national security. I would please request you all to kindly throw some light on the issue while keeping in mind the generally and widely accepted the principle of corporate surveillance as against government surveillance. Sir, may I repeat it?
Yeah, you would like me to respond?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, you just repeat what you asked.
Sir, just a second. Citizens' privacy in contrast to need of protecting national security uh, throw some light on the issue while keeping in mind the generally and widely accepted the principle of corporate surveillance as against government surveillance.
Okay. So
Yes,
good
sir.
afternoon, friends. I hope this will be a discussion with other experts also chipping in their thoughts, and we will be having more questions so that we can respond. Okay. Just to react to what Janvi has been asking. Now, we are in the midst of discussion on citizens' privacy and trying to look at it along with the national security issues. I have been one of the persons who have been always telling that security is paramount as far as the right to life is concerned. Okay, when we look at right to life, we sometimes feel that right to privacy is the most important thing, and against that we don't have anything else. Sometimes we discuss right to freedom of expression and compare it with right to privacy, and that is what we are presently seeing in the Twitter issue as well as WhatsApp issues. But the conflict between right to privacy and right to national security is more evident, particularly in countries like India, where we are exposed to the terrorist activities and neighbors who are not friendly with us. So in such a scenario, national security is so important that without national security, there is no point in discussing privacy or any other aspects of life. So privacy, if you put privacy and security side by side, we should look at the right to security as also a very important citizen's right. Otherwise, why should we have a government? The very duty of the government is to protect the citizens of a chosen national boundary. So otherwise, we don't have to pay taxes and other things. So I feel national security is as much important, if not more, than privacy. And of course, our constitution also recognizes this, because the right to privacy is, though it is considered as a fundamental right, the Puttaswamy judgment itself immediately qualified it, saying subject to reasonable exceptions, which are there in Article 19.2. So therefore, and in invoking the protection under 19.2 article, the Government of India, when it came up with the bill, that is the Personal Data Protection Bill, they actually focused only exceptions which are related to national security and left out something like contempt of court or other things. So bringing focus on the fact that the Government of India considers that security is its duty, and therefore right to privacy has to be moderated to the extent necessary and expedient for the purpose of national security. Of course, this is not always accepted by the privacy activists, but any law on privacy control has to be simultaneously looked at the impact of the privacy law on the security duties of the government, and also to some extent the business requirements in a way. See, when we talk of data as oil or something like that, what we are implying is that data is an asset which can be harnessed by the industry, and that is why today the whole internet system and others run at the current state of affairs. Otherwise, there is a cost to running this technology related services, and the cost is being recovered by the corporate entities only by using the personal data. You use the word surveillance by companies versus surveillance by government. Surveillance by government is essentially for the purpose of security, like intelligence, okay? It's always possible that some people in the government may misuse it. For the time being, let us keep that misuse separate, because there has to be checks and balances to prevent the misuse. But otherwise, the government has a need for surveillance, because it is only through surveillance that they will be able to control crimes. See, we often hear about the CCTV footage. Whenever a crime occurs, the first thing today the police look for is the CCTV footage in the scene of crime. Next, they look at mobile tower data to find out which are all the mobiles which were there in the vicinity. And many times crimes are solved only because of that. And so therefore, surveillance, we must understand, is a part of the law enforcement and national security when the issues relate to higher aspects of spreading of communal disharmony or something of that nature. Now, when we come to corporate surveillance, okay, corporate surveillance, if at all there is something like that, is to collect the information for the purpose of profiling a client, and that profiling will be used basically for advertising, and the revenue which is created out of that advertisement is what makes certain services available either free or say at a lesser rate. So if we stretch the privacy to the maximum extent, we are risking the possibility of companies which are running on the fuel of personal data to actually close down. See, as of today, we understand that, of course, the most beaten boy in the world is, of course, Facebook and Google. Now, Google was made to pay 50 million US dollars in one of the cases. Now, I understand Facebook has set aside 313 million US dollars as provision. So there is a big financial liability some of these companies are taking up. And one of the reasons why the Personal Data Protection Bill or the Act tries to balance the interests of these multiple say stakeholders is that without such a balance, the system cannot run. So therefore, when we look at citizens' privacy, we should keep our eyes and ears open for the fact that there is a legitimate interest of the business and a legitimate interest of the government, which has to be accommodated. We may use whatever terms we want, but I feel this is one of the things which we have to factor in. I think this is my opening remarks. We can later take further discussions based on others' views. Okay.
Rajesh sir, can you please throw some light on this issue?
Yeah, so I think Navi sir has rightly said. To just add it to it further, there is a difference between corporate surveillance and government surveillance. Obviously, when we talk about corporate surveillance, employees and customers come to our mind. As far as the employees are concerned, the employees are monitored for protecting the company's intellectual property, and this is only limited to the office premises. If it is going beyond the office premises, obviously it will be illegal and infringing upon the right to privacy of that particular employee. But I think as far as monitoring what employee does and within the office premises, obviously it will be within the right of that company to protect their intellectual property. Because what I have seen, what the trend I have seen nowadays is there are so many data theft cases coming up wherein right now, obviously because of the pandemic situation, everyone is working from home, but otherwise also the data theft cases are on the rise. So to protect that data from their inside employees, the company will have every right to, if it is there in their agreement, obviously, then the company is within their rights to monitor the employee, what the employee does. I mean, if that employee is using his or her private email to communicate with outside elements or not, and so forth and so forth. So obviously that is important. When we talk about the customer angle, the customers, obviously they will have to provide their consent if while collecting the data also by the body corporate, and if that body corporate is processing that data, and so forth. And obviously the customer will be able to revoke that consent once we have a proper legislation in place. But uh, that's the basic difference between the employee and the customer. When we talk about government surveillance, the consent of the citizens, I obviously it is not required in the name of national security. So if the government wants to put a particular person under surveillance because he or she is a national threat to the country, obviously they are within their rights. It's there under Information Technology Act also. So if we look at section 69 section 69B of the IT Act, it provides the government unlimited power to monitor any computer within India in the name of national security. And I think even I believe that's important in today's world and age, because everything is transacted through electronic media, and there are so many factors and so many anti-national elements there on the internet, and they're communicating through this social media channel, maybe terrorist organizations and so forth. So it is obviously important to monitor. So from that perspective, I think that government should be given, obviously there are rules to it. The government should strictly follow those rules while monitoring uh, the citizens of the country. If it's a random act of monitoring and they're infringing on the right, then obviously we have the option to approach to honorable courts and challenge the rules altogether. But I think it is important, all in all.
Sir, are all the procedures and security measures taken followed?
As far as what I have seen, I mean, while if we talk about government surveillance, I assume, right?
Yes, sir.
So there are these rules under Information Technology Act. They have the government or the agency appointed by the government will have to, and they will have to follow the rules when it comes to monitoring any computer in India. I don't know whether it is followed to the book or not, but as far as if we look at the Indian Telegram Act also, and if we talk about telephonic surveillance or tapping a phone, then there is a certain procedure which needs to be followed. Apart from that, when we talk about these rules, I suppose it's followed everywhere in India.
Okay, sir. Salman, sir, can you please throw some light to this issue?
Mr. Varis, you are on mute.
Thank you so much, Janvi. I think both of my co-panelists have already shared extensive light and more or less touch upon all the issues that are involved. But let me quickly express a couple of points which I thought may be more relevant. Of course, national security vis-a-vis privacy is going to be always a never-ending debate, because these are two aspects which are just opposed to each other. I mean, the civil society always wants to push the boundaries as far as individual, privacy is concerned, while the government or the administration wants to ensure the security of the country. And at that stage, when they undertake their tasks, there is always a clash with privacy of the individual. The Puttaswamy judgment, of course, when it was
Yes,
passed,
sir.
it made a very clear distinction to that effect, where they made privacy a fundamental right, so which has changed things in India. But nevertheless, coming to the point with regard to corporate surveillance and with regard to surveillance by the government, I think, of course, as has already been pointed out, the surveillance by the government is a necessity to ensure national security and to ensure that we are able to prosecute perpetrators of crime or people who have committed crime, and investigations as well. However, of course, there is already a due process that has been laid down under the law, whether it's the criminal law or whether it's the IT rules, the recent IT rules which have been talked about. So that due process has to be followed. And this kind of links to what you had subsequently asked. If that due process is not being followed, then of course it can be challenged in the court of law, whether it's the Supreme Court or the lower courts, in terms of the actions of the national security agencies. Similarly, with regard to corporate surveillance, I think the term is very broad in that sense, because obviously it encompasses both corporate surveillance of the premises, the physical surveillance, as well as now, as we are using work from home during the pandemic stage or the pandemic times, there is also this whole concept of electronic surveillance of the individual devices that are being used by the people from while they're working from home. Ultimately, obviously, there is certain amount of electronic surveillance that is required as far as the corporates are concerned, because there is this whole issue about confidentiality and breach of confidentiality and non-disclosure. So if a particular device on which you are working is a device that has been provided by a corporate, then there is a reasonable expectation that they would have certain surveillance and certain electronic surveillance to that effect. However, in terms of physical surveillance and premises of corporates, I think that of course gets restricted to the premises itself. And generally, corporates have disclaimers to that effect in their HR policies or in their work policies, or the notes that they give out to, or the agreements that they sign with their employees. So in that sense, yes, I think both these aspects form part of the national security landscape, and can always be used by the authorities to, investigate crimes.
Sir, our participants wants to ask a few questions. Is it permissible for the government to invade our privacy in the name of national security?
As I mentioned, there is obviously, while the right to privacy had been made a fundamental right, there are certain reasonable restrictions, and those restrictions and exceptions are where the government obviously has certain rights, and the overall welfare of the society is to be looked into. So, in cases of terrorist acts or in cases of crimes against the society, the government, the exceptions would come into play, and there would be the reasonable restrictions with regard to the right to privacy would come into play, and the government at that stage can, of course, override the individual right to privacy. And of course, in terms of the national security aspects as well, the government would have a right to override individual privacy. But again, this overriding by the government has to be followed with due process. So if ideally, generally, a court order would be required, or the investigation has to be carried out as per the provisions of the IT Act, Section 69 or 69B. There has to be authority over, or the officers investigating have to be over a certain level of qualification, or they have to be of a certain designation to take steps in that regard. So these are aspects that, of course, need to be followed, where there is overriding of personal privacy by the state.
Okay, sir. Sir, a participant wants to ask a question on right to get deleted, where the customer has right to ask the company to delete his or her personal data.
Yes, of course, the right to get their personal data deleted if the company, if the customer or the individual is no longer associated with the company, that right
Okay.
does exist. It's of course recognized in Europe. In India,
Okay.
under the proposed PDP bill, also this right would be recognized. Of course, that bill is not made into a law as yet, but that right is there.
Okay, sir. Sir, how can government strike balance between national security and privacy without violating or exposing personal data of citizens?
So exposure of personal data of citizens, of course, does not arise generally as far as the government is concerned, because wherever the security or the privacy is, breached or set aside, the right to privacy of an individual, it's only for the national security reasons or investigation of crime. But the striking of a balance, the mechanism is already there under the law, where only on a need-to-know basis access is provided, or access should be provided, and it should be only under an authorization by an officer of a certain rank, who should be authorizing that breach of privacy or that access to that information, and also the court order. So there is a due process that has been provided already under the law.
Okay, sir. Sir, a question I wanted to ask is, after the surveillance, would you say that our privacy is not infringed?
No, I would not say that the privacy is not infringed. Surveillance, of course, whether it's electronic or physical, does invade into individual privacy to a certain extent. But as I mentioned, the law provides that exception for the larger good of the society. The right to privacy there are exceptions to it. So there can be, the government can take those actions, and they can undertake surveillance in that circumstances. So if there is somebody who's perceived to be a terrorist, or there is a substantial evidence that that individual is probably planning a terrorist act, so in that case, if there is a breach of his privacy or there is surveillance of his activities, it would be one of those exceptions in which there could be an overriding of national security concerns in relation to privacy of that individual.
Okay. So our next issue is it not the duty of government to identify potential threats to nation and take steps to mitigate it? I would please request you all to throw some light on the issue. Uh, Navi, sir?
Mr. Yeah,
Navi sir, you are on mute.
Rajas sir used to tell everyone that they are on mute.
Sir, you are on mute.
I think he is unable to hear us.
Mr. Navi, you're still on mute.
Sir, you are still not audible.
I think the admin will be able to unmute, sir. So
Okay,
No,
okay.
I am
I'm
unable to.
unmuted. Yeah.
Sir,
Now, Janvi, can you just repeat that question, please?
yeah, sure, sir. Sir, is it not the duty of government to identify potential threats to nations
Okay,
and take steps to
okay,
mitigate it?
okay. See, there are two
Yes, sir.
ways you can look at the government responsibility. One is, of course, we are talking of intelligence here. Okay. Now,
Yes.
intelligence will have to start even when there is no incident. See, many times, why do we have police, say, trying to check the streets in the night or something like that? It is not that everybody who is walking in the street in the dead of the night is a suspect. But for intelligence purposes, one has to keep looking at what are available information and data. And if there are suspicious behavior, then they will have to perhaps escalate the inquiry into the next level, like stopping the person and asking where is he going or something like that. Similarly, in the internet also, one level of surveillance sometimes may be required for intelligence purpose, and then from out of that only threats will have to be recognized. So threats don't come from somewhere else. Okay, we have to actually use intelligence to understand the data flow. For example, in the case of a mobile technology, let us say, if one individual is getting calls from 100 people, and that is the place where some, let us say, crime happens later on. Now, police have to look at who is this gentleman on whom in the last, say, half an hour, some 100 calls landed. So it can be a threat. What I'm saying is the threat actually comes out of the information which is gathered, and that gathering of the information at the first stage is what we call as intelligence. Now, when we look at privacy, sometimes we feel that nobody should collect that data at all first, because at that time there is no threat. See, when police are collecting the information, or when you put a CCTV in a traffic junction and watching it for 24 hours, all the 24 hours accidents don't happen, crimes don't happen. But somewhere, one particular day, one particular this thing that will be required. So intelligence has to flow through for a much larger time. From out of that, threats will have to be recognized. Okay, then they can escalate further. Somebody is asking about the CCTV or the police mechanism on
Yes, sir.
surveillance. Okay. Now, definitely a balance has to be struck. And in the process, see, the problem is we don't trust our security people. See, even the police, we don't trust. Actually, police should be a friend of the public, but normally it doesn't happen. So, in fact, if a policeman stops us when we are driving, we are actually afraid of why he is stopping. So we don't trust and that he may be stopping it for a good reason. So the lack of trust between the citizens and the government is what makes us think sometimes that there is a privacy infringement. Otherwise, I think we would not have been raising so many issues. So I think that is the point which we have to look at. Threats are part of intelligence. Without intelligence, you cannot have security. Okay.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, Rajas, sir, can you please throw some light on the same issue?
even I agree with Navi sir, to avoid these terrorist activities or an attack like 26/11 Mumbai attack. So those kind of attacks, if we want to avoid in future, obviously constant need of surveillance is required, because as Navi sir also said that we don't know when what is going to happen. So we need to keep
Yes, sir.
monitoring things, right? And as
Hmm.
long as we don't become as a democratic nation, I don't think so that we will ever become like China or North Korea, where everything is monitored or everything is blocked. In that sense, obviously, there has to be a balance wherein the government is monitored, and it should be a AI driven surveillance. I think where the AI will be able to identify the threats. So we have seen in those in we have seen this scenario in so many movies wherein there is a so very sophisticated AI which is monitoring everything, and it is able to identify the threats before even
Hmm.
before it actually happens. So that sort of surveillance, if it is there, then obviously it will help us go a long way to avoid these terrorist attacks and so forth. But there has to be a balance for sure, that
Yes, sir.
it cannot be so random that everything is monitored and everything is stored, and thereafter the government is taking decisions like, see, we have seen that so many governments. I am not saying that our government does it, but we have seen across the globe that the government is collecting this data to its own advantage to be used
Hmm.
elections or so forth. So obviously, this shouldn't happen when it comes to monitoring, but it should be some sophisticated AI-driven solution should be in place.
Okay, sir. Salman sir, can you speak something on the issue?
Yeah, I do agree with both what Mr. Navi and Mr. Pawan said. I think, the issue here is there is a responsibility on the state to ensure security, whether it's the security of the individual or security of the nation. And there is, of course, the other aspect, which is of intelligence gathering and of investigation. So unless and until there is a mechanism of gathering intelligence, whether it is as a preemptive action or as a post crime investigation to solve the crime and identify the criminals, the state has that responsibility, and to that extent, the state would always undertake a certain amount of surveillance. Today, of course, because we are so electronically connected, that
Hmm.
surveillance which was happening, in a traditional mechanism where it would be human surveillance or it would be, surveillance through the telephone, is now happening online. And all that data sets are generated, and of course, those data sets are collated, and then from that, the government or the government authorities decide what is useless and what is actually actionable intelligence. That is ultimately what the purpose of intelligence is, to identify threats and actionable intelligence based on which they can try and prevent a crime before it happens, whether it's a terrorist act or whether it's any other crime. And in case they are not able to prevent it, then how they are able to use this intelligence or this data collected to solve the crime and identify the culprits. So that
Okay, sir.
is a debate that is always going to happen, and I think it's going to happen more so when we are moving from a physical to a digital medium and a digital economy. And I think as long as we don't become a police state or we don't become an authoritarian state, we all accept that there would be a certain amount of surveillance by our government, and which is healthy for the community and the country altogether, in order to maintain a low law and order situation.
Okay, sir. Punit ma'am just joined. How are you, ma'am?
I'm well.
Okay. Ma'am, can you throw some light on the same issue? I'll repeat it again. Is it not the duty of government to identify potential threats to nation and take steps to mitigate it?
Definitely, it is your job to do that. And that is one of the reasons why there is a curbing down, or you could say regulation of intermediary platforms, which today have become meeting points for people with anti government thinking, sometimes anti humanity thinking also. So you've seen there are multiple such movements happening on social media, where there are people getting influenced also. So it's kind of some platforms also where they can gather a following. So you start a movement, let's say, which is anti-government or anti-humanity also, or anti any particular religion, and then you start promoting it, and after that you have a million of followers who are willing to subscribe to your ideology. So at some
Okay.
point of time, I would say the movement by the government to regulate these entities itself, where they are not governed by their own policies and laws, and actually have to come within the ambit of the law of the land. That is absolutely crucial, and that is, I think, a very positive step taken towards ensuring that these platforms do not end up becoming meeting points or points for gathering people for such kind of negative activities in the name of freedom of
Yes,
speech
ma'am.
and expression. Like freedom of speech and expression also has certain limitations. It cannot be against the sovereignty and integrity of the country. It cannot be against the interests of the nation or safety of the people. So I'm sure many of you would have seen tweets which are absolutely of
Yes,
such a
ma'am.
nature that can go about agonizing people of one religion against another. There are so many such tweets. There are also tweets where the government, when they abrogated the Kashmir issue, which was there, where this Article 370 was abrogated. In that situation, also, if you will see the amount of tweets which were anti-government, which were, showing the plight of people out there, etc. Now, there's nobody to authenticate the genuine plight in such a situation. So, what you are actually looking at is somebody promoting content which is not vetted. And if you
Okay.
are promoting content which is not vetted without taking responsibility for the same, then that is an absolute disaster. Then
Yes,
you
ma'am.
have
Yes.
to, if you are promoting content, then you are like a news channel, and then you have to come within the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. You have to report, you have to ensure that the content you are promoting is true and not fake. You can't say that a user uploaded fake content and I'm not responsible. That option is not there.
Ma'am, a participant is asking, can it be said that national security is overweighing the right to privacy of individuals?
Okay. First of all, one question that comes when you're using platforms like Google, Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., which have access to almost all your data, including your location. I think that is where a bigger concern of your privacy comes than the government accessing anything. So one of the myths that people have is the government is going to access all your data, is going to have a surveillance on you. You are already in surveillance of a private
Yes, ma'am.
organization. So where does
Yes,
that
ma'am.
question arise? So it's very important to get yourself clear. Today, the government doesn't know you're meeting, let's say Janvi over here is meeting Akshay Kumar. Before that, Facebook will know. The moment you're in vicinity of certain duration, he will get a friend request of Akshay Kumar on your device. Google will know that you're in vicinity of a celebrity. The government doesn't know that. So it's
Yes,
very
ma'am.
important for you to understand that the government knows things much later. If they knew everything so proactively, we would be a very different country altogether.
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, one participant is also asking, are privacy and security prominently included in our deal process?
Privacy,
I'm
security,
getting the
deemed process.
question.
I didn't understand what deemed process would mean, but yes, right to privacy does form a part of the constitution of our country, wherein directly it is not included, but as early and far off in the case even of state of Maharashtra versus Madhukar Mandikar, the Supreme Court had held that right to privacy would be included within the right to life, and that is how we see the correlation happening. So whether or not there was a legislation in place, this was already read into Article 21 of the Constitution.
Okay.
I think, Janvi, this is Salman.
So,
I would like to add to that. Probably the question the
yes,
person
ma'am.
had
Yes,
asked.
sir.
It's a question relating to commercial contracts. When they say deal process, I think they're talking about commercial contracts. So yeah, the right to privacy to a certain extent is included in deal contracts, where there is a specific clause, especially when data is being talked about, or the overall subject of the contract is data, whether it relates to data of individuals or it relates to data which is of a community or a social group. In those contracts, there is a provision with regard to data protection, which kind of upholds the right to privacy and, of course, the right of data subjects, and also their right to get that access to that data, get that data deleted, and know why it is being collected, for what purpose, and where it is being stored. So I hope that answers that question. I mean, of course, it was a little vague, so this is just my guess what the person was asking.
Okay, sir. Aditi, are you clear with the answer?
Yes.
Okay. Sir, our third issue is after the Honorable Supreme Court declaring that the right to privacy is a fundamental right, does the citizen not have a right to decide arbitrarily interference with personal privacy? I would request you all to throw some light on this issue. Starting with Navi, sir. Am I
I am
audible to you,
unmuted.
sir?
Okay. So
Navi sir, I think you are again on mute.
it
Yeah.
is always
Yeah.
the right of the citizen to exercise his right of privacy, especially when the government is proposing some law in which there is no due process for his protection. Okay, that is basically it is there. Now, what is due process? It may depend on the particular context. As I used the word earlier also, the legitimate interest is always behind certain exceptions which are given either in the act itself, the proposed act, or in the Information Technology Act, or even in the Constitution. So citizens can exercise their rights through whatever statutory laws are framed and by demanding that due process has to be there. It is not possible for citizens to refuse the authority of the government in certain respects. If there is a situation where they have a reason to believe that a police official or some government official is exceeding his authority, India has a system where you can approach the courts to get a stay on the process. So that is how I think citizens should approach, rather than saying anytime a government tries to do something, crying out that this is perhaps infringing the privacy. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Rajesh, sir, can you please speak on the same issue?
Yeah, even I think the same. I think every right and freedom, obviously mentioned in the Constitution, is not absolute and comes with reasonable restrictions. And I completely agree with Punit when she said that we should be more concerned about corporates infringing our privacy rather than to think about the government doing something fishy. Because when it comes to corporates, I think we had the rules since 2011. The government was not enforcing these rules properly, and that's why this has come to a stage wherein there were need for new rules in 2021, and there we have this all, I mean, Twitter issue is going on. And as far as this WhatsApp privacy policy issue is also concerned, Delhi High Court that time also stated that if you are so concerned about the privacy policy used by WhatsApp, you should obviously stop using WhatsApp. You don't have any other option. You see, by in some way, the privacy policies or the terms and conditions of a corporate it is always going to be arbitrary in some form or the other. It is the trade-off, when if you're getting a free app to use, you will have to provide some sort of information to that company so that they can process that information and earn money out of it. So it is a simple trade-off as such. If you don't want your information to go to them, it's a simple solution to stop using that application altogether.
Okay, sir. Salman, sir, can you throw some light on the same issue? Sir, am I audible to you?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was on the mute. Sorry. So I agree with both my esteemed colleagues with regard to their observations in relation to the exercise of the right by individuals in as far as privacy is concerned. There is already a mechanism provided under the law. So it's the courts that we have to look at, and it's the courts that we have to approach with regard to enforcing our right, or if we feel that our right is being infringed by the state. But I think, yeah, the interesting aspect is what, not the state, but the corporates are doing with our privacy. And the WhatsApp, privacy policy change example is most appropriate in this case, where they already have access to everything. your location, your communication, and then it's correlated. It was already being shared with Facebook. And I mean, the state is not looking so much into your personal activities as much as WhatsApp or Facebook or Google's are doing. So for you to come up with an argument that I will not allow the state to have access, or the state is breaching my privacy, while you are very willingly or at times even unknowingly sharing everything as intimate as your personal life with some of these corporates. And then you don't even think twice about it while accepting the terms and conditions of these various apps and policies is what should be what individuals should be thinking about, rather than being worried about state. Of course, where there is overstepping of the authority or misuse of information in terms of state agencies, and it does happen. I'm not saying that does not. I mean, we have seen cases where, as part of investigation, certain electronic information or data or personal messages were given access to the government agencies, and they ultimately became public. So, Sushant Singh Rajput case is something that comes to my mind, where personal chat history and everything was leaked into the media. And prior to that, also, there have been instances of that kind. So, yes, their citizen, of course, has every right to, seek recourse of the law and, of course, approach the courts in order to get relief. And that mechanism is already provided under the law as such.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Do anyone has any question?
No, there is an interesting question here. I would like to react to that. Anirudh Singh is asking, how can we decentralize data storage technologies to reduce the future monopolies of data hegemony?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it is an interesting question. Now, when we talk of data storage, now there is centralization sometimes may become, for example, if you look at a corporate entity, which is collecting personal data, we sometimes suggest that the data has to be held in one place because they need to have a synchronization of different instances of personal data. Otherwise, the right to portability, right to deletion, they will not be feasible to be exercised properly. Now, what is required, however, in terms of security is whether data is, let us say, centralized or decentralized. The control has to be in a way decentralized for security purposes. See, as long as the control to the data is with one single person, the risk is concentrated in one single person. See, like I think what Mr. Singh is suggesting is, if data is in one device, then risk is concentrated. I am looking at it from the point of data risk being concentrated on people. Okay, so one possibility is data can be subdivided, that is subdivision of a data without
So you are not audible clearly.
Data, then it always creates a problem. There has to be one central place from which all the employees will have to pull the data. Now, that single location can be subdivided for control purposes, but the subdivision is not duplication. The duplication of data is one of the problems. So in terms of data storage, we have to have technologies which, without duplication of data, create subdivisions of data, so that in terms of hacking and other things, we will not be having a concentrated risk. This is sometimes used in the domain name control systems. We will have decentralized servers where half data is in this server, half data is in another server, so that anybody trying to access the data should be required to hack two servers instead of one server. So that way security is increased. But when we say two servers, I am going one step further and say that I am going to have one particular data set, dividing it into pieces and putting it in multiple sets, so that the data division is done at the micro level. Other than that, the access, for example, we normally suggest that the decryption keys or access keys itself will be held by 2 or more persons with multiple, you can say, controls, so that if somebody wants to hack, first of all, they should hack multiple servers and aggregate the data. Then they will get encrypted data. Then they will have to get multiple keys or break that multiple keys and then perhaps break the encryption. So technology is very interesting. If somebody wants to invest money and effort, you can secure the data to the extent the law of privacy expects. But most of the time, organizations try to avoid that. So this is as far as security concerns are concerned, not the say surveillance which corporates will do voluntarily because of their benefit. But there also there is in Indian law, we will be having some measures like consent manager and other things, which can be used very effectively to ensure that the data subjects or data principals do not expose all their personal data to the data fiduciaries if they turn out to be corporates who are unethical. So technology has the capability, and if the legal persons and technical persons work together in finding solutions, probably many of the questions which are being raised today can be easily tackled with a cost. I am not saying there is no cost. Today when we suggest something new, many companies say it will all involve cost. But yes, compliance has a cost. But if the cost can be overridden, solutions are feasible with the existing technology itself. And that is where perhaps the future compliance systems have to work.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. So there is one more question. What balance would... Sir, I'm not on mute. Am I audible to you?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
There is one more question. What balance would strike in your mind between cyber deterrence and offensive cyber operations on other nations?
I think somebody else should take that thing because I didn't hear full question.
Sir, you are not audible.
Janvi, can you repeat that question?
What balance would strike in your mind between cyber deterrence and offensive cyber operations on other nations?
Okay, so I think I'll take that first, and maybe the other colleagues can respond to that.
Okay, sir.
Both offensive cyber and defensive cyber are two aspects of the national cyber security policy, and especially when we talk about the geopolitics as on date, where several governments internationally have set up separate cyber commands as part of their national defense mechanism. Then we are actually looking at both offensive and defensive cyber capabilities. Certain nations have made offensive cyber part of their national strategy and have actually very actively pursued it, whether it's the US or whether it's Israel or even now China. We have seen, live examples of it. What happened, in Iran with regard to their nuclear capabilities. It was an example of offensive cyber, which was actively used by both US and Israeli governments to, prevent Iran from achieving certain nuclear capabilities. China has used it more to, offensive cyber to support their industry and to steal, wide-scale, theft of intellectual property from the West. So both offensive cyber and defensive cyber are today very much part of, the cyber security strategy of various nations. India has actually adopted both aspects, Of course, from our as a nation, our perspective, we are more as not that active on the offensive side as far as offensive cyber is concerned. And at least not in the public domain, there are any cases where offensive cyber has been adopted by India actively, and it has come out in the public. But on the defensive side, of course, I'm aware of various instances, and the most important was, during the Commonwealth Games. I have been part of certain high-level panels where this was disclosed that India witnessed or was on the receiving end of regular or on daily basis extensive denial of service attacks or extensive cyber attacks to either disrupt the games or disrupt the process of the games, and primarily they were originating from sources in China. And that is where India adopted a defensive cyber strategy, and they were successful in sort of setting aside these threats or neutralizing these threats. So I think both these aspects are more related to cyber security as a national policy, rather than of the privacy debate. But we could probably have another separate debate or a session panel discussion on national cyber security as a policy,
sure.
and both as offensive and as well as defensive strategy.
Okay, thank you, sir. Puneet ma'am, do you want to speak anything on the issue?
Well, I think India has a very comprehensive policy of using both methods as compared to nations which may have one side of the policies only. Even with respect to India, yes, we do have a cyber army. We do have things working in that direction. May not be to the level as what you see Korea or what you see China and these countries really working towards. Having a more balanced approach, our operations in the defense space using security. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Yes. So our operations are not compare it to China, Korea, especially Korea. If you see, they have a huge deployment in this space alone, and a major income also, a national income almost flowing from that region. We are talking about North Korea primarily, not South Korea. So India doesn't have that sort of an approach, and that is a very good situation to be in.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So to conclude the discussion, I would like to invite you all to throw some light on the contemporary issue that whether social media companies should be allowed to have a final say in the matter relating to their privacy policies, especially in light of overlapping principles of personal data versus personal privacy.
It is easy to answer, we cannot give. Okay, I think there is consensus about that. We don't know why Twitter is stretching it so much, but everybody knows that we cannot take a decision which sovereign government cannot do. Okay, so
Sir, your voice is not clear.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Puneet can give their views on that.
Sir, your voice was not audible in between.
Mute.
Hello.
Sir, you wanted to say something?
I think he is not able to hear us. Just
Yes, sir.
my 2 cents on the question, that the answer would be an absolute no when it comes to the social media companies were deciding what should be their privacy policy and how they should have a last call on what should be legal, what should be illegal. They need to follow as they follow the law around the world. If we take an example of EU, if they're following GDPR in those EU related countries, obviously they have to follow Indian law as well. And it was high time for the government to come in between and actually challenge these social media companies, because we had these rules since 2011. Obviously the rules are more comprehensive now when we talk about 2021 new intermediary guidelines, but we had a subset of it back in the year 2011 as well, but it wasn't implemented properly. Now when we talk about uh, Twitter losing its safe harbor place, obviously it was there. The government should have done it back in the year 2011 or 2022, 2012 also, but it wasn't done properly. The government is taking steps right now to ensure that the social media companies do not act arbitrarily, or they do not have a final say when it comes to privacy of Indian citizens or cybersecurity of Indian citizens. So it's a good initiative all in all, and I hope it works out.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Salman, sir, would you like to speak something on the same issue?
Yeah. So Janvi, I think I would adopt a more, balanced approach. There is obviously these corporates are there and they are there to make money. They have their own independent policies. They want to sort of implement them. No, while they should have a certain independence with regard to drafting their policies and adopting them. However, I think they have to comply with the law of the land. So while they can have a certain level of independence as far as framing their own policies is concerned, but the law of the land should be complied with. So as long as they are broadly complying with the national laws and the applicable regulations, they can of course frame their own regulations and policies, privacy policies, because ultimately they are corporate and they need that freedom and independence to work in that environment. So that message should not go that everything has to be as dictated by the government. As long as broadly they are qualifying and they are complying with the law of the land, I think they could be allowed to frame their own policies. So that's one. As far as the current debate is concerned, I think the concept of these intermediaries or these apps losing their intermediary status or the safe harbor status. I think that's a misnomer, I would say, because ultimately, the fact is that the Section 79, it says, the heading of the section of the IT Act is that they have to the responsibility is always on the intermediary. And the intermediary is always required to take all due care and do all due diligence, except in circumstances where they have not done due diligence and they have not taken all due care. They would be liable for offences. Earlier, what was happening was that they were given this safe harbor that generally they would be given the freedom or the benefit of acting as an intermediary or a platform and would not be held liable for the acts of third parties, as long as their own mechanisms and their due diligence was in place. Now, it was not normally challenged or checked whether they had done the due diligence or whether they had taken relevant steps technically and physically in terms of audits and etc. But now, after these new rules, I think the liability or the burden of proof is on them to show to the court or to the government, that they have complied with that provision. So that is the change that has happened now. And I think that is something important that probably we all should consider.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Puneet ma'am, would you like to throw some light on the same issue?
There's only one thing I would want all the participants to think about it. Like before 21st of February 2021, before the intermediary guidelines came in, we were all anti these applications as a group of people, everybody. that they're misusing our data. They could be possibly doing anything. As a matter of fact, that many times is a breach of your privacy, especially if the applications are collecting data without informed consent happening from your end. A lot of these platforms not supportive of the Indian Data Protection Bill, lots of controversy about it, data sovereignty issues, so many people raising questions, debates, whether it may be opposition, all of this going on the subject of breach of data of individuals by corporate entities. That may include social media platforms or any other platforms collecting this data. Then suddenly the intermediary guidelines come, and then these same platforms suddenly become the champion of right to freedom of speech and expression of individuals. Today, when an individual, let's say their basic right is violated, like if let's take an example of any young girl or boy, and any of their videos are uploaded or anything of this nature happens on these platforms, they have to go to the police station, they have to take a long route altogether, which is not that easy for a common man to really go about doing. The intermediary guidelines offers a 3-level redressal mechanism, and where these platforms at the first hand itself on being intimated of such content have to pull it down. That is where your privacy, your private moments in your life is being protected from entering into a public domain in such a nature. So today, when
Yes,
you
ma'am.
see a lot of these organizations who themselves were violating all of this and were in question, for that matter of fact, I would say they were in the box with respect to violating individuals' privacies. Obviously, WhatsApp, Google, Facebook, everybody was in the same boat. And along with Twitter. And today, suddenly we see when the intermediary guidelines come in, all of them are championing the cause of freedom of speech and expression and violation of privacy of individuals by the government. That is all very haywire. And I think even as individuals who are rational and intelligent, we need to realize where the balance really lies and what is genuinely in our benefit. Because a lot of these debates can continue to keep happening, but we need to understand not just by current situations, but the way things have been over the years. What these organizations have been, what their approach has been. Have they genuinely been champions of freedom of speech and expression, or is it selectively that they are promoting certain people's speech and expression, and certain people's speech and expression is absolutely thrown out of the window? So we need to look at things from a very holistic perspective. So I think everybody by themselves would have a fair idea which side they support and stand.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, our participants has some question. What is really needed to stop nation-state attacks? Is the existing international legal framework adequate, or does that need to be revamped? May I repeat this question? Navisa, you're saying something? Can you please unmute yourself?
It's a state of war, and wars will keep on happening. And we have moved from the traditional war to the information war. So we have to face it. There is no in avoiding it. We have to face it. That's all I can say. Okay.
Okay. So the another question is, what actually comes under personal data which can be recovered, which can be covered under privacy?
Yeah, somebody can answer that.
So the another question is it really true that the WhatsApp privacy policy in India is different from the privacy policies offered to the Europe?
Okay. We will not leave that question. What comes under personal data? Is it data?
So your voice is not clear.
See what comes, and now you are able to hear me, no?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So what comes under personal data is any information which, along with whatever information I already have, I am able to identify a particular living nature.
So your voice is not clear.
Can be called personal data as long as it is directly or indirectly leading to the identification of the individual. So that is the simple definition of personal data. Only sensitive personal data that can be protected. Now, as far as WhatsApp policy is concerned, there is a difference in the Indian version and European version. They have a different policy, and the most difficult to accept is the grievance reversal mechanism, which they want Indians to take the cases to the US courts, whereas in other cases they may be able to take the grievance reversal in the local jurisdictions. And of course, EU is under GDPR, and WhatsApp conforms to the GDPR norms. Here, because there is no law, they are trying to set new say rules. And of course, I leave it to WhatsApp to put whatever rules they want. And in terms of consent, I will only ask them to be clear about what data they are collecting and how they are using it, not vague about it. That's all. In privacy, we can only expect that there is a clear notice of what they are doing. And if I am agreeable, I will use that service. Otherwise, I am not supposed to use it like that. So I have no problem in the consent. But grievance redressal mechanism has to enable an Indian to actually resolve his grievances within India. And on that, the WhatsApp policy, I think, failed. Okay. Yeah,
So what are the stance on GDPR by Government of India? What are the stance on GDPR by Government of India?
Okay. Any other questions which we have left unanswered?
Sir, one question is, what are the stance on GDPR by Government of India?
There was one case regarding any mechanisms used by surveillance authorities to single out individuals engaged in activities. See, whenever a surveillance, like let's say CCTV footage is there, it captures the video. Now, next you have to run a face recognition software to really identify a person. There are technologies such as gait recognition or something like that, where the movements of people are observed, and the AI or system perhaps will identify that there is something which is fishy about this particular person. Now, that needs further analysis being escalated into a higher level. Now, it is here that technology can be used in such a manner that the first level of surveillance, where there are thousands of people whose faces are being read, that can be done by a machine. There is no need for an individual sitting behind a computer looking at all the 1,000 people. The machine can see all the 1,000 people, and wherever it gets a doubt, 1 or 2%, that can be escalated for human beings to further look at it. That way, the human surveillance is only on those cases where there is a threat perception. That, I think, is within the provisions of the normal due process for privacy, and technology permits that, and it is possible even to have this face recognition. Technology is used, and then it can be even done in such a manner that without looking at the face, I can capture the technological parameters of the face, and I can continue working on that. So all this is available in technology. As I told earlier, if we are willing to invest in technology and use our intelligence, we can satisfy both the privacy activists and the technology persons, so that technology persons can make use of the information for anonymized data generation, and privacy people will be happy that the privacy is protected. Maybe more effort is required in technologies and the legal people working together.
Okay, thank you so
Yeah,
much,
that can
sir.
add if they have got other views.
Okay. Do anyone wants to throw any points?
Yeah, Puneet is having any thoughts?
Puneet ma'am,
Yes.
you want to share something?
No, actually, I already did share my opinion on this entire discussion, wherein the whole approach I do not understand. So we have people who are for and against the same subject in different situations and turns, as what even about the WhatsApp policy Naviji was mentioning, that yes, different states, different nations do have a different stand. Today, the reason WhatsApp and all these organizations are able to take a differential stand is because we as a nation have never really enforced our rights or laws ever before, as what even Rajas was mentioning. Today, when the question is coming about to enforcing intermediary guidelines, and then obviously our nation is looking down the line to a data protection law also going to come into place. In my opinion, what I feel is that a lot of these platforms and organizations, they are feeling a noose tightening on the neck. So it's like first is the intermediary guidelines, slowly tightening up. You're going to have the data protection law, wherein there are further controls that are going to be put on them, where for the past 20 years in India, they've had a free hand. So I think the entire issue is not that of privacy, but it is actually from the perspective of intermediaries, it is primarily that of control. More and more control that is passing into the hands of a data subject, more and more control in the hands of the government to regulate these entities, and vis-a-vis the kind of control they had previously, where they could promote any subject, they could promote people, they could do anything that they wanted out of the purview of government regulation. So in my opinion, I would sum up and say that the issue is primarily not of privacy or national security to the extent as it is of control for that matter of fact.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. Do anyone has any question left? Here we have experts, those who can answer your questions.
Janvi, I think we have to put a hard stop to this, otherwise.
Okay. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Navi, sir, for taking the time. Thank you so much,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. We'll end up here.